Hail cheaters! Welcome to the Always Cheating Podcast. My name is Josh. I'm here with Brandon. Brandon, how are you?
Josh, I'm great. It's not champagne, but it's Spanish sparkling wine that I poured to celebrate the launch of the 10th season of Always Cheating, playing FPL and podcasting to the great FPL community. So cheers to everyone out there watching and listening.
Yeah, I've got my liquid IV in a water bottle because I'm on a real health kick. I've lost almost 15 pounds since the last pod, Brandon. So you can actually do a side-by-side weight comparison on these YouTube videos to gauge the changes.
We, is similar with our fantasy scores, right, Josh? Like personally, professionally, health-wise, we always tend to be on opposite trajectories.
That's true. You and I should do a cross weights challenge. Let's see. I'm curious when you and I would cross weights. I might still weigh more than you. I'm not sure. Like we'll have to. We'll do a weigh-in the next time you're in New York. So thanks everyone for joining us on the pod today, and we're happy to be back. This is our 10th season doing fantasy content, which is kind of amazing. We started this 2014 and a bit of a lark. I think we really thought that we might do it for 5 years. I mean, I think that was, or even one. I mean, who knows, right? Maybe we were going to do it for a handful of episodes and quit. I mean, that's a pretty standard way to do a podcast. If you go to the iTunes store or like Spotify or whatever, or even like YouTube and just dig through like channels, like 97% of the content has 3 episodes, right? Because it's like, it's a shocking amount of work to do even one of these things. And then you do 3 and you get 8 listeners and you're like, why am I doing this again? So
easiest possible thing to join your buddy for a beer and say, hey, I've got a great idea. This could be fun.
Absolutely.
And I mean, like you said, it's a lot of work. So we salute everybody out there who aspires to be a content creator.
Totally.
10 seasons, Josh.
But 600 episodes. if you include our main feed and then our Patreon pods, right? We've got to be like, we've definitely done the like 10,000 hours at this point, right?
We will not be judged this season, though, Josh, on our longevity. Every season we begin anew. We will be judged on how good of an FPL season we have. I think both of us found last season to be a challenge to our. We have generally
to be good at it,
and we don't have similar management styles in fantasy, so it was interesting to see us both kind of struggle through different styles. So. We've had a kind of a 2-month break to be a bit of a refresher coming into this season, seeing the game as it launched. Are you feeling confident? You feeling positive? You feeling optimistic? Or are you kind of going into this season with some sense of caution?
No, I'm feeling very optimistic. I feel great. I mean, I think, it's interesting because when they first announced the changes yesterday, we're recording this on Wednesday. This is the first of 2 pods we're going to do this week. It's kind of our launch pod, and then Sunday evening, which is when we typically record the pod, we will do kind of our first season preview pod, and so that'll crank out a couple days. But when they first announced the changes to the game, I kind of thought they were somewhat minor at first, and the more I thought about them, I thought they were really smart and won't kind of undermine the structure of the game, but will only kind of add more strategic possibilities. Obviously, we can talk more about that in a minute. I thought the prices were good this year. I think throwing Haaland out there at 15 million, which is the highest price that they've ever given to a player in fantasy. I thought they may have done it higher, and then they did confirm though when they released the prices that 14 was the highest anyone had ever started. So 15 is the new high. And so that
would have been 14. Would that be like Van Persie or something?
I was thinking maybe Van Persie, maybe Ronaldo if you go back that far. So I think the prices are good, but I think the 5 transfer thing, and again, I don't want to like totally do all the, but this is all the kind of stuff we're going to talk about in today's pod, right? It's just like, well, like the implications for all of these changes, and so I think to me, it's going to break up some of the feeling that sometimes people have of like, oh, everything is kind of the same. Or what I think is also really great is I actually think these changes, especially the 5 transfers, are something that is good for. It's good for people who take the game super seriously, and it's good for people who don't take the game very seriously, right? Because if you take the game super seriously, you can sort of map out a big kind of transfer strategy over several weeks. Obviously you need to still get lucky with injuries, right? I don't know how many past seasons I ever would have had 5 transfers, just given things that might change. But But I also think if you, if something comes up in your life, right, or you just miss, I don't know, like the fixtures during the holidays, right? Like a lot of people travel, and that's when a lot of people just kind of give up on fantasy because like, I just can't do it anymore. So now, if you miss a couple of game weeks and you feel like, it's all over for me, you have 4 transfers or whatever, right? You're going to have like
you come back with a bang, right?
It's like a bonus wild card.
Strength immediately. That's right.
Yeah. So I'd say that as a real positive change. Like, what do you think so far?
Our friend Tom Campbell on Twitter said as much. Like, this is my dream come true to have these 5 rolling over transfers, because my style tends to be to my detriment, a little more patient.
Yeah.
And if you play the patient game, you often find yourself backed into a corner where you're like, suddenly I have to make a lot of changes. So I think it kind of evens the playing field a little bit for whether you're aggressive or patient. There is an advantage to playing either way, and more so the ability to factor the transfer rollovers into your chip play. I thought that was really cool that Fantasy took that into account, how playing a chip basically negates any sort of rollover transfer strategy that you might have. Yeah. So I feel like that's always one of the weaknesses of the chips, is that if you play a chip strategy, you kind of have to just focus solely on that to the detriment of your game. Now, some of that's still definitely going to be a factor, because like your whole building your team toward a bench boost, et cetera, that much doesn't change.
Yeah. And by the way, if this is the first fantasy Premier League pod you've ever listened to, stuff like chip talk and chip strategy and whatever, this is all stuff that we will get into and discuss in the preseason pods. It's hard not to get kind of in the weeds with this stuff already, because these are the things that are sort of front of mind for us, because the game really hasn't changed very much over the last handful of years. And so seeing these types of changes, again, seemingly minor at first, but I think opens up a lot of possibilities, and I think will lead to a lot of teams looking very different, because some people will want to wait. The way the game worked, obviously going into before this season, was you had maximum of 2 transfers, right? And that was it. And if you went 10 weeks without making a change, you had 2 transfers at the end, right? Or like you said, if you played one of these, if you wild carded, for example, that was that reset the clock, right? And so there were a lot of times, early on too, where it almost became like a theme. I remember talking to a friend of the pod, Dave, about this before, about sometimes it's like I didn't want to play an early wild card because I had 2 transfers and it felt like a waste. It was like, well, what a waste. It's like I went to all the trouble to save this extra transfer. So, it feels like a waste of wild card right now. And now you can wild card and still hold that for the week after, which is, I think it also, again, I am, I guess I really am. I'm talking myself into even more optimism, because I think let's say you have 2 transfers and you wild card, and you can come out of that with 2 frees, like right off the bat, instead of the 1 that you would have had last season. That means you can really make a bold move on that wild card, right? You can go for something that's really aggressive, right? Or even 3 transfers for that matter, right? You can really target a particular game week or take a flyer on a player or something like that, knowing that you kind of have this safety valve, right? Of 2 or 3 transfers that you can play going right out of that. So I think, it's going to solve that problem of, oh man, everybody has the same wild card team this week or whatever, right? Which sometimes you do see.
It's funny to me, the rollover transfer thing being like our big talking point at the start of this episode. Like, so many people involved publicly in FPL always pose this question: if you could change anything about the game, what would you change? Yeah. And I can't remember a single time in which this particular change of banking up to 5 transfers was ever mentioned. And yet somehow it feels like sort of perfect.
Good change
to me. It's a good change. And while there are lots of other changes that people were hoping for that didn't come, generally you have to be impressed that FPL has done anything. Now we can get into like deadline talk and grander feelings about the chips as they are and the mystery chip. But I feel like we need to do a little more table setting here about what this episode is going to be, because God, it feels good to be back. I'm feeling refreshed. And maybe just a little bit more intro on who we are for any newbies. I wonder how many new players to FPL we're going to get this season on the back of the Euros or Copa. I mean, I think you get new players to the fantasy game just automatically of people coming of age. You get young people who are finally like their interest is heightened enough to want to play fantasy. You know, you and I both got into fantasy because we were into the Premier League, and we were like, well, how do we get more invested in all these teams and create a better base of knowledge? And fantasy is great for that. But yeah, this summer had a lot of football, and frankly, part of me feeling refreshed is it was great to just have summer tournament international football that could be kind of entertaining background noise.
Yeah, no real stakes. I mean, I did my first ever Calcutta. I'm not even sure how many people are familiar with the Calcutta, which is this kind of, you pick clubs and follow them, and that was a fun experience. If anyone wants to talk about that, you can hit me up on the Patreon Discord or something. But it was a really fun experience. But similar to you, I mean, especially the Copa. The Copa I was just watching in a completely, like I was just watching with horror this last Sunday, where I put my 7-year-old to bed. And I was like, 8:30. Like, I wonder, I was like, well, sometimes it kicks off a little late, right? I was like, so maybe it hasn't started yet. And I missed all of the hullabaloo. I think, did it start, 97 minutes late or something?
It was like around 9:30 Eastern time that it kicked off. It was more than an hour late. And all the images of like the crying, terrified children and other match goers, and then just wild scenes of those Colombian fans like trying to climb into
the air conditioning ducts.
The air conditioning, like they were John McClane and Die Hard, and crazy scenes. Yeah, definitely not what you want to see when you tune in just to have a fanciful match. But it was a great sort of comparison of different styles of football to have watched the Euro Cup final earlier in that day, where it was something maybe just a little bit more, I'm going to choose my words carefully here, methodical, maybe we would say, versus Argentina-Colombia, which was just like handbrake off, hell for leather sort of football.
Yeah, it was pretty raw. Like, you really saw, I don't know if you watch any of the Uruguay-Brazil match. That was one of the
I did not. So
chippiest. Well, it was just foul city for the second. Mm-hmm. It was a really bizarre game. It was more like, it's just like this. I think what makes these international tournaments so fun is that, the stakes are so high, right? That it's like everything is so. I mean, we saw Ronaldo and Messi, right? The generation's two great legends, both weeping right on the pitch in different matches, and for different reasons. But it was sort of
very different reasons.
but still, like everything's very pitched. And so the Uruguay Brazil match was just one example of this, where it was so intense that it was barely recognizable as football / soccer, right? It was so intense. So, by the way, and I do say the word soccer, I feel like, again, if you're unfamiliar with us, we are a couple of Americans. We grew up in the Midwest. We, again, have been doing this pod for about 10 years, going into our 10th year. We, I don't know, have a long record of success in the fantasy game. I have
winners.
I have 5 top 10K finishes. I think that's very solid, and so it helps to I like to think that at times we know what we're talking about. And I am based out of Brooklyn. You were, Brandon, for almost 20 years, and now you're in Toronto, Canada.
Yeah, but you have to pronounce it Toronto. That's what I'm learning. If you pronounce the extra T. Somebody here in Toronto told me this story about Law and Order. I think Law and Order is translated like across the world. There might be a Law and Order in London for all I know. So they released a Law and Order Toronto, and you've got the voiceover that says, like, in the criminal justice system, you've got two whatevers. And in New York City, the original one would say, and in this one it says in Toronto. And apparently upon the premiere of Law and Order Toronto, there was a collective groan around town, like, no, he's pronounced the name of the city incorrectly. So Toronto, I've been here since January, and I've already met some great FPL players and members of the Always Cheating community here. So we're going international.
That's right.
But I'm already planning with you to get back to Brooklyn sometime this fall, so we can meet up with our New York cheating family and anybody else who's rolling through town.
Yeah. I'm also going to be at Yankee Stadium for the Man City AC Milan match a week from Saturday. I guess that would be I think that's the 27th. So if anyone is in New York or is planning to be in New York for that match, let me know. You can meet my kid. It's a special Josh Quinn trip, Brandon,
Nice.
up to the stadium. So I may even wear this Dulwich Hamlet kit, by the way. This was Sam won our second half Patreon kit contest last year. And the goal was you had to pick, the winner could get any kit of their choice as long as it wasn't a Premier League kit. So Sam picked Dulwich Hamlet, which is a fantastic kit. You can see redacted the sponsor, which is a record label. They're somewhere in London. I can't remember where Dulwich Hamlet is.
They're like
north.
I'm going to blow it. I want to say northeast, but they're on the outskirts. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
we'll be corrected, I'm sure.
Yeah. We'll be corrected swiftly, I'm sure. But but a really great kit. I love it. And so that's one example of what you can get if you are a Patreon supporter. We're not going to do a bunch of big pitches on this week's podcast. There's just too much to cover this time around, and you're just getting to know us in some cases. But we do extra podcasts each week on our Patreon, and we have mini leagues. There are all different types of mini leagues for different countries, right? Different countries that represent us in our Discord. There may or may not be some cash leagues in there as well. We don't run those ourselves, but those do exist in there. So again, we don't condone them.
I look away. I cover my eyes.
Yeah, exactly. We cover our eyes, but if that's what you're looking for, you could probably find it there. Again,
some people just want to taste, Josh, just a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. But again, not officially sponsored stuff. We also run a bunch of contests. So just a way to keep fantasy fun. Again, that's really the goal of the pod, Brandon, is to make fantasy fun. Again, make sure that we are. And again, obviously it's a little bit of a joke. There's nothing political about that, but just a pun. But, the idea is just that we're not going to ever, try our best, at least, ever to take fantasy too seriously, get too kind of over our skis, get too angry. This is, I felt like during COVID when things were intense all across the world and in our neighborhoods and homes, I felt like that spilled into the pod sometimes. And you and I think, made a real effort to kind of reset and make sure that we were keeping things light. And so that's really the goal for this pod.
Totally. And as somebody who just relocated to another country, like fantasy sports gets moved into a slightly different focus. I think you and I talked about an article in the New York Times Magazine years and years ago. There's a staff writer there who was waxing nostalgic about his NFL fantasy league that he'd been in for like a whole generation with his high school friends, and it was the connective tissue that still kept them together. And it's how they communicated. And for me, make fantasy fun again also means anybody out there who just wants to connect with somebody else who's playing a game they love or following the league that they're really interested in. I want this podcast to be that every week, just a point to touch base with other people who appreciate the game in similar ways, or maybe slightly different ways that complement the way you look at it.
The other, and I agree with all that. And the other thing I'll note too, is kind of it's completely unrelated, but unrelated in the sense that it's a like quasi promo. But we are excited to work with Fantasy Football Hub again this year. Really a huge admiration for the full team of people that they have there, and
the hub, as I like to call it, Josh.
The hub, as Brandon likes to call it. I think that it's what I really like about it is that it's some of the smartest quotes. So I think especially if you have any kind of analytical inclination, or if you don't and you want to listen to people who are, which is kind of where I find myself, Brandon. I am someone who is friendly to analytics, but I would not consider myself comfortable with it, right? I'm not going to be doing my own modeling or anything like that, but I really like to see models that other people put together.
You're modeling that Dulwich Hamlet kit.
That's true.
Quite nicely.
Physically, I'm a model, but in terms of what I can do, with this brain, it's less.
And y'all can see Josh in this kit if you go to our YouTube page, youtube.com/@alwayscheating and watch this episode too. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted your flow. Talk about the hub because I love it too. Like beyond like the team reveals that you get from like best managers in the game. game is the fixture ticker, super clear. I'm a color obsessive. I like, I don't know a lot about color theory, but I got my purple lights, and I find the whole palette going on at the hub really pleasing.
Yeah, and so I like it too. It's like slightly different. I like the way it's cleaner than some other sites out there. I think not that we're not to casting shade, right? It sounds like I'm casting shade. I don't mean to though. And no, I did not mean anything by that. But they have a really great one-stop shop preseason guide that I was actually looking to in preparation for today's pod. So that could be handy as well. But if you go to fantasyfootballhub.co.uk/always, you get a discount on your membership. So once again, fantasyfootballhub.co.uk/always. So Brandon, once again, I just wanted to quickly note, and then we're going to move on to actual proper fantasy.
Please,
content.
God, Jesus.
We threw some at the top with the rule changes, but we are going to do 2 pods this week. So again, today's pod, and then we'll be back on Sunday with a proper game, or not game week 1, but a proper preseason preview, and we're going to be doing some. Lots of preview content, lots of pods to come.
This is kind of just like a freewheeling, hey, vibe check now that the game is launched sort of episode, which I
remember how to talk into a microphone, all that stuff.
This is kind of like a preseason friendly that we're recording right now.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we can't go the full 90 today for sure. I
match
think
fitness.
Match fitness. Yeah, they might pull us off in the 61st minute. All right, well let's get into some of the game changes that are happening this season, and let me share. I think people have already kind of. Well, I actually don't know. I don't know. Maybe, if you're listening to this and you're completely unfamiliar, then and this is probably going to be too small to look at anyway. But I think and I don't feel like changing the size. I'll
it's
bring
fine.
It up a little bit.
Yeah. People have big screen TVs out there.
Yeah, exactly. People are all listening to this.
I watch YouTube on my smart TV, Josh. I might be a weirdo there, but pull up the YouTube app and get in full 1080p. Always cheating.
I like that you called it your smart TV. I mean, I guess that is right. It sounds old when you say it, but I guess it's not necessarily.
I'm a consumer, man. I am a consumer. I get the terminology correct.
So I think the biggest change from year over year that we should talk about, which we've already got into a little bit, is that you can now save up to 5 transfers, right? So each week in fantasy, you start the season off, you get $100 million budget to spend. You've got to allocate that across your squad, right? 2 keepers, 5 defenders, 5 midfielders, 3 forwards. That's all same as in the past. And then from there, you get 1 free transfer that you can make any week, right? And that's just whoever you can afford. If you want to make more than that, you take a point penalty. And that is still the case this season. But what's nice is that if you are able to do enough advanced planning, or maybe, if you are able to, you might want to strengthen your bench, right? Like having a stronger bench might be something to think about going into the season, because now you can bank more than 2 transfers. It used to be 2 max. Now it's up to 5. And again, because people are frequently wild card early, I always go into the season hoping that I'll wild card. Usually, you get 2 wild cards. Usually you want to play one in the first, week 17 would be great, right?
Josh, best case scenario is you never have to play it. Things are going so well. And it's the story as old as FPL time, where your season kind of gets derailed the moment you play that wild card, where it's suddenly you change course and maybe make a few decisions that go against some of the good things that you've done. So I think that this actually, the 5 transfer banking rule, will free us up to feel better about just playing an early wild card, playing a wild card whenever, because transforming your team is going to be easier. Now, the thing that, knee-jerk decisions, fantasy is full of them, and you're often reacting to things that either went poorly for your team, players that went off that weekend that you don't have, you're going to knee-jerk them in. So sometimes waiting patiently for 3 game weeks to build up a wind of free transfers in your sales is not going to work. But I like the idea of this freeing us up to kind of be a little bit more laissez-faire with when we play our wild card.
I agree. And I also think if nothing else, personally, I'm not sure how much it will really change my own strategy. I suspect that it I mean, I think it will around wild cards and things like that. But what I actually like is I think it will just free things up, because I think a lot of people out there will be really compelled to use those free transfers. And I think, or I mean, to save those free transfers. And I think, I don't know that will always be the optimal strategy, right? And so I actually, I think there could be some real, like there's some interesting strategic considerations here about just basically being aggressive all the time, right? Versus it's
Wouldn't
like, it's
you
like
say, would you advocate like the best practice in FPL is probably to act quicker than other managers? So what this rule change means is a lot of chatter is now going to be about the benefits of saving your transfers.
Yeah.
And I kind of like where you're going here, is it creates another advantage to people who just want to kind of play the old way and just continue to be a bit more aggressive.
I mean, yes, I do think so. And I think honestly, I really think both strategies are viable, right? Because some of the, like our friend, the FPL general, right, tends to be a more conservative manager. There's a number out there, right, who it's sort of, I think you do have to play your personality to a certain degree, right? You have to, like, for me, I have fun making transfers. Like it's part of the fun of the game for me. And I think last year, which is, far and away the worst season I've ever had playing fantasy, I think I got away from that a little bit. And I actually was trying to play a patient style that didn't really work for me, right? It didn't work for my personality. And I do think you have to kind of lean into that a little bit, right? Like,
so you and I have played a large number of blackjack hands together. Shout out to Blue Wire hosting us at the Wynn Hotel and Casino last summer. And you always tell me, like, well, when you get 16, you have to, it's some people would hit, some people would stay. But what you have to know when you sit down at that table is, what are you going to do?
Right.
And and take that sort of the weight of that decision off the table. And that's kind of like what you're saying about going into a fantasy season, just knowing how do you want to manage. And if you have some clarity of how, like, what your style is going to be, it's going to be easier for you to make decisions based on that throughout the season, as opposed to waffling every game week and trying to fish around for no style at all, Totally.
And you can still change gears, I think that it's what am I doing?
Good night, Quinny.
Yeah. Oh, Uncle B says good night, Quinny. All right. So I think that's, sorry about that. I got a little, but yeah,
that's live television for you.
And I think you can still change gears, though. I think that you can still, you don't need to be fully committed, right? I mean, I do like to play an aggressive style. I like to make a lot of moves, but sometimes your squad is fine, right? And that's fine too. And so I don't I don't want to sometimes I almost feel like, and again, you don't it's a mistake, I think, to look at certain people on social media or whatever and sort of pull them out as totally representative of, but I think sometimes I think I think we've seen this even in our own mini league. I can think our friend Danny and stuff like that. There's certain people who almost get caught in the idea that they play a certain kind of style and that's who they are. Yeah. And sometimes I'm you don't need to do that. You can just kind of chill out this week.
Make some smart decisions every once in a while.
One way or the other, right? Sometimes people are, or the other way around, where someone's well, I do have 3 problems that I want to fix, but I think the sensible move is to hold my transfer. And I'm why? Just fix a problem.
Not to further beat this a horse, but it's true to be able to shift gears is not always at the expense of your style. Your style can remain consistent, but when you go against it, you do it consciously and you understand why. And that it's inherently makes you a better fantasy manager when you know the situation calls for you to do something that's a little bit out of the norm. Yeah.
I guess to put a frame on this, it's just to be sort of intentional with play the game. Don't let the game play you. Yes, how about that, Brandon? Yeah.
I love talking about passivity and when FPL plays you, just Yakov Smirnov. Don't be a Yakov Smirnov is what I'm saying.
Well, so are you worried about this? Because it's all well and good for you to say this right now, but any longtime listener will know, you're a real, two in the bush versus the bird in the hand, or you like to save transfers. You like to I don't think you're like overly conservative, but like you do play a slightly more conservative style, I think. And like, are you worried that this is going to play to some of your I don't know, play into some of your instincts in a way that might hurt you?
I think so. So where I think anybody might get into trouble playing the patient game is I'm going to target fixtures 5 weeks from now. And that's where, for everyone who knows about chip strategy, will be very familiar with this pitfall of, well, I spent the last 5 weeks planning for this chip strategy, and now it's kind of like slowly, steadily falling apart the closer I get to when I have to play it. So I think like even outside of chip strategy, the weakness of me or being a passive manager is everything is directed to something that's too far in the future, and you lose sight of the next game week in hand. And certainly if I think of the best moments I've had in fantasy, one that vaguely sticks out in my mind is going from Lukaku to Zlatan back to Lukaku within a 3-game week period, and it worked.
Yeah,
the hokey cokey, and it worked. And I think about that often as how being not so much aggressive but intentional can actually work to your benefit. So I want to be conscious of it, but again, I think that I accept who I am as a manager, and I can see finding myself with 5 free transfers at some point in the season actually being a huge win.
I mean, it sounds super fun. Like the idea of playing 5 transfers and not taking a massive like minus 12 or 16 sounds fantastic.
The key is quickly. I think the key is going to be recognizing when you're in the flow and when your team is good, and that's the moment when you can kind of lean into that 5 transfer strategy. But don't miss the point when you're like, your team needs help and you need to address it ASAP.
Absolutely, especially at the margins. Because I think that and I feel like I'm sort of advocating for a more aggressive stance still, but I will say I really do. There is a lot of validity in being patient in this game as well. And I think if you sort of take a blue chip stock kind of strategy, right? Like barring injuries, the most expensive players, the most highly owned players at the start of the season are most likely going to be the players that have the most points at the end of the season as well, right? There'll be a couple of people that pop up in there. But in a normal season, there's a thing that people say about the NCAA tournament, right? Which is that when you go into the NCAA basketball tournament, when you go into the NCAA basketball tournament, you're picking your brackets or whatever, right? You're trying to pick the team you think might win it all. A lot of people advocate for looking at the preseason top 25, right? Because that is in some ways the most objective kind of look at the value of each team, right? Like in terms of the talent on the squad and their, what they maybe done historically, if there's players that have kind of stuck around year over year. And I think that there's something to be said for kind of thinking about FPL that way a little bit as well, which is sort of, are you fully stocked up on enough like kind of blue chip stocks, right? Like you look at your squad ahead of game week 1 and it's all this kind of, you're playing the fixtures and like, somehow you have like your team is just full of kind of mid-table players and stuff like that, right? It may be time to reset a little bit. I'm jumping the gun here a little bit, but I do think that when you look at the fixtures, I do think that the one thing people are going to have to be a little cautious of, it's a little bit like a World Cup summer where you had the Copa and you had the Euros, and a lot of players in the Premier League made the final of those 2 tournaments, right? And so I think
any Premier League players playing in the Open Championship this weekend that I need to be aware of?
That's a good question. Yeah, is it a pro-am? Are we going to get some? Is someone going to hurt their kicking
their
leg?
Achilles. I feel like isn't Achilles also a golf injury? Maybe.
Yeah. So, but I think that I read today that, because I read it because I was curious who was traveling to New York. I bought these tickets and I was like, wait, am I going to know anyone in the pitch here? Because like everyone was playing in the Euros.
It's the Rico Lewis Invitational.
Yeah, well, thankfully Haaland. So you have Haaland, Jack Grealish, Rico Lewis, Ederson. So that's a nice little quartet.
Oscar Bob. You see Bob in the flesh.
Obi-Wan, right? Yeah, exactly. You have him too. I don't actually know what his number is, but Obi-Wan would be cool.
Yeah, they always have all have super ridiculously high numbers, these young players these days. It's probably like 82 or something like that.
Is zero? Are there any, like in basketball? You have zeros. Are there any zeros in?
I can't think of any. I don't know if that's allowed.
Or double. You can even be a double zero. Detroit Piston William Bedford was a double zero, Brandon, back in the early 90s. So that's interesting. We should look into that. I wonder if you can actually legally do that. In the NFL, it used to be a little more strict, and it was like. The wide receivers tended to be in the 80s, for example, running backs from the 20s. Anyway, I'm getting totally carried away here,
just going back to the city players, and I'm picking up what you're putting down there in terms of who's already in the midst of gelling with their teammates at the club level versus players that, like Alex McAllister, who played in the Copa final, is going to get some time off. He's not going to join the team until later. So where's the chemistry? And our friend Chancer Dan on Twitter, I think he was advocating strongly for Haaland starting in game week 1, just because he's a powerhouse of a player who's got a full summer's rest. And it's really a rarity to get these really high caliber club players who don't have an international team that's strong enough at this moment to take them to a tournament in the summer. So that suddenly, I'm very curious to hear about your scouting report on Haaland.
Yeah, I mean, that price is just the really, like, that's the thing I've got to kind of figure out. Yeah. I don't know about you. I mean, when I logged in, I did auto fill just to get my little number as low as possible.
All right, let's talk numbers, Josh. Where are you at?
I know why you want to talk numbers, but I'm at least.
Do I? Yeah. Should I be proud of this? I don't know.
I think so. I finished. I'm in 4 digits. I feel good about that at least. But I'm 69.39. So nice, easy to remember. I'll say that. 69.39.
Oh yeah, I can get into my numerology report, which I'm dedicated to making a more regular sort of occurrence. I'll bring the numerology sort of charts for our team IDs for the next episode. But just looking at 6, 9, multiples of 3, and then 3 is half of 6. Mm-hmm. So that's very easy to remember, followed by another 9. So I really like it. Yeah. I was
probably the best team idea I've ever had, to be totally honest.
You're never going to forget it. You'll remember that when you ultimately do get hit.
I mean,
by that
I still remember 20153, which was my ID number from last season. So,
do you remember your student ID number from Michigan State?
No.
I actually blame Michigan State for me not having fully committed my social security number to memory, because that's usually
You still don't.
I've got the last 4 digits committed to memory, but
that's true. That's the easy. That's the one thing I always ask for. Yeah,
I've got some mental budget that I need to sort of.
All right. So anyway, what's your number?
So I was accused on our Patreon Discord of really not having anything to do at work, and listen, anyone who's got like a low team ID, it's not like they're a coal miner. Okay, It's not that difficult to just hit refresh. Now, I was very lucky in that I just kind of strode up to my laptop and was hitting refresh a couple of times, drinking my morning coffee. Hour later, went back and I just hit it on the first try, right as it went live. And I got 738, a 3-digit ID, my first ever 3-digit ID, 738. We'll run that through the numerology calculator to see what that portends for my season. Only good things.
Well, 3 + 8 is 11, 7-11. That's kind of fun.
A great convenience store just became a great season
ID
for FPL.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so that's our goals for this season now are to beat our ID number.
There you go.
6939 seems doable, but
738 would be better than I've ever done.
That'd be amazing. Me too. I mean, 738 would be fantastic. All right, so let's get into another change here. The bonus point system is had a few changes here. I've shared it here with you, Brandon. But basically, saving of penalties reduced from 15 to 9. These are all the bonus point changes I don't really have an opinion on, to be totally honest. I guess I think there probably are more pens or more pen possibilities because of VAR. Semi-automated, offsides coming this year. I'm really excited about that. I think it's going to help. It won't necessarily help with pens too much, but still, I think it's going to help us
Tell me
bad
what
about
you think the
behavior.
rationale is for reducing the BPS for a penalty save. Do we think FPL thought these goalkeepers on losing, usually it's on a losing team, somebody's got a pen save, weirdly, is how I just think of it in my mind. They were just getting too much extra credit for that?
They must have looked at it and it must have been like a little bit of an outlier in the data. But I mean, I feel like a pen save is like usually like one of the more significant events of a weekend in the Premier League, right?
It's not easy to do.
No. And so, scoring a goal is for like a forward scoring a goal is 24 BPS, right? So saving a penalty now is like, almost a third of that. That feels, I don't have a problem with it, but it's not anything I'm like, I feel super, I'm not like enthusiastic about it.
Thanks for fixing that problem for us, FPL. I mean, they did some funky stuff with goalkeepers. I don't know if we get to this
we will
later
in a second.
I'll keep my powder dry. Go on with the BPS.
Yeah. Goalkeepers and defenders conceding a goal. And so, and by the way, I don't want to try to draw the line between people who have played fantasy for a long time and someone who may have just never come across Premier League fantasy before, but basically there's bonus points that are allocated at the end of each match, 1, 2, and 3. Sometimes more than 3 players get them because if you're tied on bonus points, then they like there was a match last year where I felt like there was like a 5-way tie for 3 bonus points. Remember that? Like near the end of the season, it was like it was just everyone straight up was just on 3. It was like it was a weird match. I think it was like a 1-1. It was just like no one stood out.
Speaking of threes and numerology, I just have to shout out this comment in our YouTube chat from Sam Brennan, who says last year's team ID was 3333.
Wow.
So
that's amazing. It's hard to believe. Yeah. Goalkeepers and defenders conceding a goal are now worth -4 BPS. I think that does make sense. I actually do, so even though it's a little unfair in some ways, right? Because because often a goal being conceded is typically there's typically one responsible party, right? Like sometimes maybe 1 or 2, and so sometimes it does feel a little unfair. But it's also kind of annoying when a Kieran Trippier creates some chances, and Newcastle lose 4-3, and he hoovered up the bonus points, right? And so it sort of feels like it doesn't quite reflect the game as it was watched. And so I assume that that's a little bit of what these changes are about. Goal line clearance is worth 3 bonus points now. I think that makes sense. Or BPS, I should say. BPS being, it's like ATM machine, BPS bonus points system. A foul 1
automatic teller machine.
Yeah. A foul 1 is worth 1 BPS, and a shot on target's now worth 2. So someone did, I actually it was Mark from Scout, did a look at how that might change things. And I'm going to share that with you now too, Brandon, just so you can take a quick look at it. But basically, it was not as significant as effectively the bonus points that got added on. I mean, the people who benefited from it are, forgot. I thought I was still sharing, but I actually wasn't. I was just talking to you, I was just chatting, which is great, fun to chat.
You're on mute. You're not on mute. It's just like a classic Zoom meeting gag.
Yeah. Okay. So if you look at the what changes for, if you add in all these bonus points, the most bonus points gained, you're looking at Foden, Haaland, Saka, Watkins, Salah. There are a handful of players who pick up the slack here, but it doesn't feel to me like it's going to significantly upend anything in the game. Now, I could be wrong about that, but at first glance, I don't see this changing things, too dramatically. What do you think? What do you think about the bonus point changes?
Well, I think ultimately, just got to flash this up on screen. Listen, look at this. Credit FPL Black Box. That's pretty cool.
Graphics.
The bonus points, I think it's a lot of Sturm and Drang ultimately, because if these bonus points are going to be doled out to the goal scorers, like most matches that are played out in FPL will have a goal or 2, and that's what's going to decide who gets the bonus. So the marginal calls on these tweaks, maybe ultimately it could decide a very tight mini league race over the grand scheme of things. But it's kind of like blaming a refereeing decision for your fate on the pitch. I think if my FPL season is decided by these BPS changes, then that's on me. That's not on the referee.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I'd say I'll just say it's TBD, right? It's maybe it'll end up making a bigger difference than we expect, but right now it's TBD. So the other changes are the like okay sure category for me. One is the 10 points for I like that maybe they felt bad about reducing BPS for a pen save, and so they're like,
therefore,
well, why don't we get therefore if a goalkeeper scores a goal, it gets 10 points. And I mean, now we're gonna get like 3 goalkeeper goals this season, right?
Dude,
it's gonna be
what if suddenly Ederson finally becomes like the full-time pen taker for Man City and breaks the game immediately?
That really would be amazing. I guess it'll never happen because they have to be able to get back, right? Like it could only happen if there was a pen in like the 98th minute of a game or something like that, right? Like otherwise it's they're rebounded or something. Like
our friends at FPL USA made a great point of like why this change to make a goalkeeper goal 10 points, which is honestly never going to happen. Goalkeepers have scored goals, yes, but it's really not going to affect the fantasy game. Why not do something that's more likely to occur, like a goalkeeper assist, making that special, like 5 points instead of 3? So I thought that was an interesting point from FPL USA, and I guess it's like maybe it's like controversy stirs conversation sort of theory of let's do something that's kind of outlandish but ultimately doesn't really amount to anything.
Well, that brings us to the mystery chip, which, listen, I have been, I think, very warm and open about the changes that the fantasy games made this season. I love them.
Yeah,
I think it's all great and fun and has me excited about the season. I'm not really feeling the mystery chip. I have to say it's you know what, the mystery chip is not for me. Right? I don't like chips. I don't even think we need wild cards. To me, I like a pure. I just want transfers, right? Like to me, that's like the purest form of the game, and that's a little bit more like kind of a non-fantasy as well, right? Like NFL fantasy, you don't have like a triple captain, right? Which I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that because the season is incredibly long. In the Premier League season is 38 weeks, right? You need some things in there to give it a little juice, right? Like I do totally get that. But like a mystery chip, and my working theory is basically that they have a cool idea, or what they hope is a cool idea, but they're not 100% sure they can code it, and so they want to keep the option open for it to be like a bonus wild card or something like that, right? Like something like a little more standard
for people who are hip to like office nomenclature. I would have loved it instead of it calling the mystery chip. It was just a box that just said TK. And there was like no mention of it in these rule changes either. Just us left to even more wildly speculate. Yeah. I mean, I have a greater capacity for wonder than you, perhaps.
Sure.
And I'm whatever. It seems fun. I think it's kind of fun for us to be like, well, what is it? I'm always happy when I get the little dum-dum sucker that has the question mark on it. Like it's just sort of like clearly this was the leftover corn syrup that they didn't have the right food coloring for. Whatever. Yeah. It's gonna be a lark. It's a laugh. It'll be lads on tour chip or something like that.
I like by the way that you said sucker, because that's what I grew up saying too.
Lollipop.
It's a very Midwestern thing. Yeah, it's like pop versus soda, right? It's like sucker versus lollipop. Yeah. All right, well, let's move on, Brandon, because we've already done almost an hour here, amazingly. The player prices and position changes, I'll share just the price screen here, so you and I can kind of take a look at it and be looking at the same thing. But I think there are a few takeaways right off the bat, and I think the biggest one is obviously Haaland at 15 million. We talked about it briefly at the start of the pod. What do you think about Haaland at 15 million? Like, what are your kind of initial thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I said this a couple of minutes ago, but I'm compelled by the argument that a refreshed Haaland who may be on a revenge mission where, his pursuit of the Ballon d'Or was, set back.
Right.
by having his best season for City the year that Lionel Messi happened to win the World Cup.
Yeah.
I wonder what his motivation will be now, meaning I'm thinking it will be high. It will be heightened.
Yeah.
This has to be hand in hand with what's up with Man City right now. Now they have some key players who are aging, namely like Kevin De Bruyne. Can Bernardo Silva continue to be this sort of dynamic force for the attack? Rodri, we'll see how severe his injury is. That will be very clear cut once we get up to the game week 1 deadline. Yeah. And what other things if anything, is Pep going to do to really refresh the squad? And I think that will ultimately tip the scales in favor of Haaland or not. Right now, Haaland is in my just slapdash initial draft because I just don't think a lot of people are going to go for Haaland at this price. And it's a higher level of difficulty. So if you're an experienced manager, you can figure out a way to maybe not build an optimal squad, but you can build a good squad with Haaland in there. And if you have that experience of recent seasons and you can build a pretty good squad and keep Haaland in there, you could have an advantage over the entire field if Haaland just starts strong and has an incredible goal scoring record. So that's I'm currently looking at him like I want him. Now what that ultimately then means is my midfield picks suffer. So you can't have Haaland and have the midfield that you want, and that goes straight to how they priced Saka and Cole Palmer. And to me, I'm curious what you think here. It feels like an easy decision at this moment. We'll see how scared I get closer to the deadline to go Cole Palmer over Saka. Now, if you go cheaper up front, no Haaland, you can have both. But if you have to choose, just the form that Palmer exhibited for Chelsea, some unknowns there in terms of new management. But I think the way Palmer played for Chelsea and the way that it took Chelsea such a long time to sort of catch up to speed with what Pochettino wanted to do there, I'm not sure Palmer really relies on who the manager is. I think he's just going to go do his thing. So I'm feeling very bullish on Haaland and Palmer, less so on Salah and Saka. And, this is where, I really show my butt, where I'm just I like Odegaard. I'm happy to have him. He's probably not the better pick over Saka.
Well, I mean, but price is a huge consideration, right? I mean, Odegaard at 8.5 versus Saka at 10. Yeah, it's pretty significant. I think that it's and Saka, I feel like we saw, he just plays a lot of minutes, right? I think eventually Arteta's going to have to start managing his minutes a little more carefully, and it feels like he keeps even at the Euros. I mean, obviously he scored significant equalizing goal, and in the was it the quarterfinals?
Some would say Saka was England's strongest, most consistent player throughout the tournament. If you're looking for one, and it's hard. I think there's an argument out there where Saka's just kept his form going, and he can play these minutes, and it was good for him to have a good tournament and bring that confidence into the season.
I want to say that Watkins and Palmer were the best players for England, even though I realized neither one of them started a single match. But every time they were out there, I was like, I don't know.
Well, those are two players who are guaranteed to be in virtually every manager's squad in game week 1, though. I mean, Watkins at 9.0.
Yeah.
I feel like we kind of got away. He could have easily be priced at 9.5. I don't know, 10. Yeah, could you see 10 for Watkins? I mean, he's on the precipice of taking that number 9 mantle from Harry Kane for England. So why not?
Yeah, I mean, he was the highest scoring forward in fantasy last season. He is, and yet he's. Granted, actually, I mean, in some ways it plays to his advantage though as well, right? Which is that that Watkins never gets injured. Haaland, he did outscore Haaland because Haaland missed, several game weeks, but with an injury around the winter. But I mean, to Watkins, 9 million. I think that's, I mean, look at Roberto Firmino, who rarely had, I don't think he ever had a season as good as Watkins had last season. And, he would consistently be in that 9 or 9.5 million territory. So I suppose the Champions League maybe adds a little bit of a monkey wrench in there. It's gonna be more minutes for him. But I agree. I think 9.5 or even 10 would have been reasonable. And I honestly I think even just putting fantasy aside, I think he's as good a player as the players in the 10 million range. Right. And so I think that's, he stands out to me. I mean, I think Isak at 8.5 is another really standout option. I think that's where it does get a little harder, I think, to make Haaland work is that I really like the idea of having Isak and Watkins to start off the season. And Isak, Watkins, Haaland would mean you'd have what is that 32.5 million. I mean, that's quite a lot for just 3 players in your squad.
So then Nico Jackson is going to be a player who's going to get a lot of love in the preseason because he was kind of banter for the first half of the Premier League season last season. Right. And then he came on, scored a lot of crucial fantasy points for a lot of people.
Still never looked great.
Yeah. You kind of the points came in very weird and in different ways.
Yeah.
But that would be the case against Haaland listen, there are plenty of goals there's plenty better value. There are as many goals available to you to have a more optimal squad to go Jackson, Isak, Watkins. Why would you bother with Haaland? And Haaland, I think the problem for me with Haaland last season was I captained him too much. And he did not score at the same volume match over match as he did his first season with Man City. So the captaincy was a bit of a trap. So if you're paying 15 million for Haaland, you've got to be captaining him more often than not to justify that. And if he remains to be kind of that trap, then immediately I think he's got to be off the table. So the gamble there is I'm going to captain him, and he is going to be scoring hat tricks at least once a month for me.
Well, I mean, Ipswich at home in game week 2, right? I mean, that's a really significant fixture for Man City and for Haaland, and certainly it would be very scary to not have him for that match, right? And so I think like hat trick at minimum would be your expectation, Brandon, right? If you have Haaland for game week 2,
has to be,
that's his floor.
That's his
double hat trick is his floor.
We're looking at.
No,
he sets the single season
teams
Premier League goal scoring record in just that match. He scores 35 goals or something ridiculous.
Well, I think that Haaland is and we're going to go all in on forwards very soon on a separate pod. But I think there's a lot to think about with Haaland, and again, it will kind of come down to your team structure, which I haven't really dug into too much yet, because I think there's a lot of things that are going to change. A lot of players who will be leaving their clubs, right, or who will be, sometimes swapping Premier League clubs, sometimes leaving the club entirely. I mean, I'm really kind of bummed out that Michael Olise went to Bayern Munich, for example. Like that's a bummer. Just from like it felt like Crystal Palace were finally starting to put something together, and it's a shame to lose someone of his quality. Although they, maybe the money will help them to fund a couple new, options.
It could be, but yeah, like last season was this inflection point where you saw all these newer, younger players, Watkins and Palmer specifically,
Munoz. Not in Palace. Yeah. Just in general.
Palace is its own incredible story. But I just, even if Olise would have stayed in the Premier League and gone to even like, God forbid, Man City or something like that, I would have, at least we would get to watch him. But it's like, not only did Palace lose him, the Premier League lost him, the FPL game lost him. And that's what bums me out.
Wow. I can tell you're getting a little, we got to move on because you're getting upset.
Please.
But I think if you, because I kind of agree with you. And I think we saw it even this summer as well, right? Which was a kind of unwillingness to drop. Listen, I don't mean to, Southgate was in a tough spot with Kane, right? He probably should not have kept starting him, right? To be totally honest. And but he's the captain, and whether it's there, you have to, there's an element of politics that you've got to play as a manager as well, right? And so I think that that's part of it. I think that Watkins could have done more for England down the stretch. Yes, I do, and I think maybe Kane in 30 minutes might have been more effective, but.
This is why it's good to, I think generally we agree that like Premier League teams, most clubs change their managers over and too frequently and don't have a lot of patience. But in the international game, Southgate was around long enough to where he had sort of built this sort of like small business, where Harry Maguire was like the chief operating officer. Kind of weird stuff. But I feel like what Southgate had accomplished with Kane, there was just no other way it was going to play out. And I feel like Southgate probably knew, win or lose, this was his last go at it. And Kane, he came here with Kane, and let's just see it through. And I just don't feel like if I were an England supporter, that would be my biggest grievance with how it all played out. Like,
no, but
it's more in Kane for he just didn't show up. I mean, Southgate I think was right to play Kane, and it's on Kane for not showing up.
But at some point it was clear. Like, at what point was it clear that we weren't going to get that Kane? Like, probably by the round of 16, right?
Fair.
Like, it was, a manager is supposed to. But anyway, the reason I bring this up is
if Luke Shaw is going to break into that team in the last two matches, even though I thought Luke Shaw I was like, holy crap!
I know he had a great final.
He played really well for a guy who's like not played any football for a year. So I take your point. Good point.
But anyway, I think that the reason I bring this up is because I look at some of the most expensive players in the game, and I wonder if there's that kind of sea change that we talked about with Kane and England, and we're kind of seeing a pretty big age gap here, right? In terms of Salah, Son, De Bruyne, especially, right? The sort of all Salah's at 12.5 million, showed some real signs of decline last year. New manager as well with Klopp out. Kevin De Bruyne hasn't been able to stay healthy for a long time now. Son, I mean, I have nothing really bad to say about Son other than the team just isn't quite as strong as some of the other squads out there that have these kind of double-digit.
That could change, players. like you were saying, like Spurs could make some really compelling signings in the coming weeks, and suddenly it's a different case for Son.
A lot of goals in Ange ball too, so there's something there. So, but I at the moment, like, I don't know that I would have Salah, Son, or De Bruyne in my squad going into game week 1. And so I think that is something, whereas in years past, I think Salah especially would have been an absolute lock, no doubter kind of option for my team.
Liverpool is an interesting one. The quick draft that I threw together doesn't have a single Liverpool player, yet when I look at the opening fixtures, Liverpool has among the strongest runs. They have Ipswich away in game week 1, Brentford at home, Manchester United for them, Forest, Bournemouth, Wolves. It's sort of like a shame that we're gonna have this like trepidation with Liverpool aging and new management when they could just be like the diamonds in the rough here.
Yeah, and Luis Diaz played right until the Copa final, so we won't see probably a fresh version of him at the start of the season, which is a shame because he's only 7.5 million. He's an incredible price, I think. And along with Isak too. Again, I want to hit that again here because I think at 8.5 million,
he's your boy.
And they play Southampton at home in game week 1. It's just really hard for me now to see him having a strong match to start the season. And I think that is something as we get closer to game week 1, we'll just have a better sense of who is actually going to play and maybe play 90. And because that's the other thing is you don't want to spend 10 million on one of these players to start the season, gobble up 10% of your budget. And then they come on as a 72nd minute substitute. Right. And and one of the reasons you have them early on is because they play whatever, like Liverpool play. Yeah, like exactly. Or Liverpool play Ipswich away in game week 1, right? A great early fixture, but you wouldn't want Diaz, right? If he was only going to come on in the 80th minute, for example.
Do you like how I just shoehorned in a dig at Southampton there? Like I expect nothing from this club.
Yeah, I did like that. And you know what? So let's end our price conversation with one quick note, which is that there might actually be more 4 million defender value than usual. I was kind of surprised by how many options there were. That again, we could see a lot of signings, a lot of the promoted. They're all in the promoted clubs, as you would expect, right? Yeah. And so we could see signings. We've already seen a couple that maybe have made some players less viable, but there are a number of options that at the moment that look very likely to start this season. They tend to be center backs who don't score a lot, but even if you just look at Leicester City, right? A team that was only down for 1 year, came right back up. A team that's going to be about as Premier League ready as you're going to get from a promoted squad, right? And Wout Faes and Yannick Vestergaard are both priced at $4 million in the game. And Wout Faes, in particular, is a pretty strong player. I mean, I thought he played reasonably well in the Euros, and I don't know. Like, I think that he is an option, I think, at $4 million for sure. Great name too.
Strong Higazi energy. You remember the Egyptian center back for West Brom back in the day?
Yes, I do remember Higazi. Yes.
I can see that. Yeah, and you're also looking out for, like, as a Fulham supporter, looking at the transfer wire there, and a player like Emile Smith-Rowe, 5.5. People are bidding for him. Fulham might get him. Immediately an attacking player who goes from he's not going to get any minutes to suddenly he's playing close to 90 every week for a mid-table side. So I'm on the lookout for players like that too. You might be finding bargains.
Yeah, exactly. That happens almost every year, right? As you get a player. The only risk there is sometimes those players get kind of eased into the squad. That is not always, right? Sometimes they just throw them right into the deep end, and they just so it's a little bit of a proceed with caution situation. Just one last note, Brandon, which is a couple more possibly overpriced players. What'd you think about Trent at $7 million? I guess I'm tipping my hand a little bit there when I phrase it that way, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess how I feel about that is I'm giving FPL credit for pricing up the attacking players, because these are where we kind of want to see our teams different, and there are a lot of enticing attacking options. In the defense, not a lot of intriguing options, full stop.
Right.
So I kind of want him to be cheaper because I want some fun players that I can actually afford. And I cannot afford Trent at $7 million straight up. It's sort of like you can't even have the conversation about what you think about this, because I just can't even get on board with the strategy where you would try to figure out a way to have Trent. To me, on the first day that the game is launched, I'm convinced it's not the right strategy. Trent can prove me wrong. He often does for like weeks at a time. But still, like we were saying with Liverpool, there are lots of unknowns with this squad at the moment, and I want to get in cheap where I can just to explore with them.
And you can get Gvardiol for $6 million, right? A player.
That guy was the stud of all studs at the end of last season for defensive options.
Exactly. Yeah, really strong player. And I think, I think the worry would be a little bit about Virgil van Dijk's, what seems like a little bit of decline. Honestly, Trent himself, I think, and that defense in general is kind of. It's again, this is all relative because these players are all younger than me and you, but like they're graying a little bit, right? It feels like it's a little, and so I think Liverpool is an especially difficult question to resolve at the moment. I think I want to see. I'm curious who they bring in, what they kind of look like in the preseason. Again, it's gonna be so tricky though, because so many of these players won't, Cody Gakpo, Virgil van Dijk, right? They were in the semifinals with the Netherlands. Like, they're not going to be able to play, maybe not until game week 1, right? Or like very, very close to it.
Yeah. I think it's now going to come to roost for Liverpool that they never found like a good center back pairing for Virgil. Maybe Virgil's just very difficult to get along with, and no one could stick it out. But like with him fading now from his like elite position, there's no one immediately ready to step in and fill those shoes for Liverpool. So I agree. Yeah. Defense could be a struggle for them.
We know that Jota will be fine. He played about 9 minutes for Portugal, so he'll be fresh and ready.
Ronaldo.
Yeah, exactly. Can never stay healthy though, so we'll see on that front. All right, Brandon. One last thing. I was going to talk about fixtures a little bit, but I think we're going to save that. Let's save that for an upcoming pod. The last thing I wanted to talk about, though, was I don't know why I always get excited about this. This is just me being a big old nerd, Brandon. But I am kind of excited about some of the position changes that we saw this season. So let's go into those real quick. There were only a handful. I feel like maybe less than previous seasons.
I need you to fill me in here because I totally missed this conversation. I didn't even look for positional changes. So hit me.
Exciting.
What happened?
I like when I can introduce things to you. We saw a handful of changes this season. 6 in particular. The biggest one for you is that Ian Maatsen move. I know you're.
Maddie.
That's Maddie. Maddie Ice. The other Maddie Ice. IMAC. IMAC moves from midfield to defense. No, the biggest move I think is I suppose you could say 2 of them. Kai Havertz and Richarlison. They're both in North London, which is that Havertz and Richarlison are both classified now as forwards. Richarlison makes total sense. He played as a forward almost. Certainly primarily in the Ange system. The Havertz one I think is a little trickier. So like Richarlison makes sense. Havertz though, I feel like he's kind of certainly at the end of the season he was playing as a forward, but is that a given? Like, do Arsenal buy somebody, Gabriel Jesus replacement perhaps, or someone to share the load with him? Does that move Havertz back a little bit? It's hard. Yeah. He certainly played very well down the stretch, but I don't know that I love Havertz as an 8 million forward.
I think if Arsenal buy a number 9 or competition for Havertz, I think if Havertz gets pushed back into the midfield, he doesn't start. Yeah, would be my feeling. Like I feel like Arteta worked to find the best possible spot for Havertz to work in his system, and he ultimately did, kind of in that forward role. Yeah. But prior to that, I don't think they were getting as much out of him that maybe he couldn't get. Listen, I think Arsenal should buy Danny Elmo after those Euros and play him in the Kai Havertz position, and then get a strong number 9 to play with Odegaard, Saka, and Olmo. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a lot. You're dropping a big one on me there. I don't know. I think. I like Olmo.
Sure, why not? Who would say no to that? Who would say no?
I'm not going to say no to that right now. Timo Werner at 7 million, or not Timo Werner, excuse me, Richarlison at 7 million. Again, we're getting our sea legs here, Brennan. Richarlison at 7 million is not bad, assuming that he is able to. I guess he was with Brazil. I don't feel like he played very much though, so I don't know. Maybe he'll still get extended rest because he was training with them and things like that. But I think that presumably he'll be back sooner than later for Spurs. But it's not a bad price, really.
Yeah, he's just never really found his spot at Spurs, and I don't know that changes. I don't know that he's going to gain Ange's trust, and he's not going to gain fantasy managers' trust without an extended run of form. So if there's a forward signing at Spurs, then I think the Richarlison pick is dead in the water. So I'm kind of really not paying attention to that one.
Nkunku, I think, is an interesting one. He goes down in price, I think, from 7.5 last year to 6.5. Obviously, he was injured almost the entire year, but super talented player. Moves from a forward to a midfielder, and I think there is a world where a rejuvenated Nkunku,
love this.
Makes us really have to rethink Cole Palmer too, love right? This. Because at 4 million cheaper, it's going to be a conversation. If we're talking about, again, it's all like we're kind of wish casting right now, right? Because we haven't seen that version.
Blue sky FPL, and it's not beyond the realm of possibility for us just to have Palmer and Nkunku.
Oh, you could have both, absolutely. At 6.5 million, it's not impossible.
And Palmer is not like a selfish, I'm never going to pass the ball type of player. Like imagine Palmer in that Chelsea squad fully fit where he felt free to pass it to somebody who wasn't going to totally blow it. So if Nkunku and Palmer are both in form, then it'll just be points all over the place for them.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting time for Chelsea. I think after a really rough start to last season. So those are the changes. I think they're kind of interesting. I mean, at the Semenyo, that makes sense. He basically played as on the right wing. I really like Semenyo as a player. Maybe he'll have some value. He was such great value last year at 4.5 million. So that's your position changes. I was going to talk about scheduling, Brandon, but I think we've done enough for this kind of opening pod. Again, we'll be back on Sunday. We'll dig into stuff more deeply. Did you have any final thoughts on player prices? Anything that stuck out to you?
I just want to fire up the computer here. I'm running some numbers. The numerology computer is just getting going. So I decided to get us started, because a lot of people have their data charts and their tables and their models.
Yeah.
And that's all grounded here on Earth. I want to look to the heavens, to the astral plane for our numbers.
Yeah.
And so just to get us started, I plugged in today, the auspicious day in which the 2024-25 season launched. So you plug in, we want the life path for July 17th, 2024.
Yeah.
That number comes out to 7 + 8 + 8, 23 over 5. Here's what this means for our FPL season, Josh.
Yeah.
It's the number of freedom and change. Let's talk about optimism, right? Those with the life number of 5 tend to be adventurous and free-spirited people. You are much more likely to crave change and new life experiences, maybe a mystery chip. Because of your upbeat personality, you are likely to motivate others. You're curious, flexible, and impulsive.
And you're not reading this off a script, right? These are just things that you know about.
I learned this from all the many numerology textbooks that I read over the course of the summer.
I know you've done some of those. What are those X? You've done some of the videos, right, as well. The masterclass. Yeah, a lot of numerology masterclasses.
Actually, I'm using seventhlifepath.com if you want to join me on my journey.
Okay.
This number 7 + 8 + 5, where we can extract 23 over 5. 5 is the key number today. And if you identify with the number 5 at all in your life, I think you should be looking for an FPL season of freedom and change, and embrace that.
I like it. I think your next drop, by the way, has to be the Modern Lovers astral plane. There we go. The astral plane.
That's where we're going.
Yeah, that's where we're going. I like it. All right, this is good. I want to find out what my number is for myself later on too. So maybe we'll save that for a future pod. Thanks, everyone. We're really happy to be back. It's exciting. I think you can tell if you're listening or watching or however you're consuming this pod that Brendan and I are both really excited about the season and looking forward to getting back to it. It's fun. It's just a great way to stay connected to all your friends. I mean, I think it was sort of I don't know. Like, I think for whatever reason, it feels like after a couple of crazy COVID years that we're sort of instead of having very normal tournaments this summer, even the Copa America craziness felt normal. It's like, that's what normally happens at a Copa, right? It was like we're back to normal again. So having all of, everything kind of reset, I think it feels like we're going into the summer with what feels like a kind of normal reset mode. And I think that's good for the game. I think it'll be good for people who are new to the game or people who are returning and just want a fresh start. So, Brandon, let's make sure that we make fantasy fun again this season. If you want to join us, if you want to listen to extra podcasts this season, if you want to just say thank you for the podcast that we do every week. Again, the podcasts are recorded on Sunday. The standard podcast is recorded every Sunday evening, released Monday morning. And we also record a podcast on Thursday. That's typically when we do it for our Patreon supporters. But one bonus podcast each week is what we aim for. And you can go to patreon.com/alwayscheating to join us and say thanks. There's a bunch of different tiers there, including the producer tier. Brendan, do you want to thank our producer patrons?
Absolutely. These are the kings and queens of Always Cheating. Big thanks to producers Mike DePietro, the OG, Trevor Ingerson, our buddy Chris Howell, Bobbas Kuhn, James Holland, Dave Wagner-Lodahl, Nick Wright, Lazaros Llanos, Jesse Halstead, Bruce Kerr, Brian Chin, Blair Jacobson, Todd Byerly, Andy Portlock at FPL Merch, Kerry Swanson, Jefferson Turner, Buffalo Wild Wings, Francis Moore, Sam Shower, Caleb Robbie, Volker Paulson Kruger, Alex Holcomb, James Heatley, The Saint, James Keatley, The Saint, Bob Fox, Craig Jackson, Shalin F. Kadakia, Terrence O'Donnell, Heath Cram, Thomas Tislov, Noah and Louise, Travis Grant, Linus Fennerstrom, Dan Parsons, James C., Matthew Skinner, Frode Jacobson, Brennan, Daniel Hart, Lolly, Ben Coombs, Eric Kite, Gareth H., Rune Sandberg, Brian Clark, and James Murray Wood. You know what gets us off to a great start to the season is a rating and a review and a subscription, and just tell your friends, share us on social media. We want just to spread this community far and wide. So wherever,
especially early on in the preseason when people are finding, looking for podcasts, it's really, really helpful.
Yeah. So we're super grateful. Subscribe so you never miss an episode. Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Yes, exactly. You can get the audio or video on YouTube, however you like. Follow us on social media. We're still mostly active on Twitter, and that's what we'll call it. Twitter, we'll say soccer, and we'll say Twitter.
Yeah, exactly.
We're at Hail Cheaters there, wherever you get your social media. And our website where you can get the link to our public Super League code. That's alwayscheating.com. Go there to join the Super League right away. We have thousands of managers there. And if you win the Super League, God willing, you can pick whatever you want from our online shop, which is also on that site. So dig around the online shop and get excited about how you're going to be kitted out.
Yeah, get a Bus Team mug for the start of the season. Nice. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. And once again, patreon.com/alwayscheatings where you can go support the pod. fantasyfootballhub.co.uk/always is where you can get a discount on your hub membership for the season. We'll be back on Sunday. Have a great evening, great day, whatever you're listening. I'm excited. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Hail Cheaters.